where the elements go to dance. For 6 days I travelled through the ancient heart of Scotland, taking in an untold number of historic sites including fairy tale castles, standing stones that have withstood the test of thousands of years lying open in the fields and valleys, botanic gardens, majestic landscapes, and too many surprises to recount. All within easy reach of Glasgow and the Central Belt, which is never as far away as it seems. So come with me and get ready to go wild about Argyll. Three types of transport helped me make my way across Argyll. It all started with a magnificent journey along the world-famous West Highland rail line. I also availed of quite a few ferries to be able to hopscotch from one island or peninsula to the next. The rest of the trip, around 150 odd miles, was completed on 2 wheels by bicycle, and there are a number of stunning cycling paths throughout the region. Not a car anywhere in sight. Having boarded the train at Glasgow, I disembarked some 2 hours later at the head of Loch Awe, in the shadow of the mighty mountain Ben Cruachan, reputed home of the legendary Scottish figure of the Cailleach, or Queen of Winter, whose icy grasp could still be seen in the high hills. Perhaps in an attempt to ward her off, my first stop was at St. Conan's Kirk, an eccentric architectural masterpiece that gives every impression of being a medieval building, but was in fact built in the early 20th century. I then recharged with a brownie and a coffee at Ben Cruachan Inn and departed to see my first of many castles on this adventure, none other than the iconic KILCHURN castle at the top of Loch Awe. KILCHURN was the seat of the Campbells of Glenorchy, but when a Cromwellian fortress was built at nearby Fort William, the castle became redundant. Ever since, it's been an inspiration for everyone from 19th century romantics right through to modern day Instagrammers. The rest of Loch Awe is truly no exception. Flanked by mist-shrouded hills, small and quiet roads run alongside either bank of the loch, past historic sites like the ruins of INNIS Castle, which you can access by renting a boat at nearby Loch Awe boats. The key is not to rush. The joy of this route is taking the time to really revel in the small wonders along it. The overgrown ruins of all but forgotten minor castles, for instance, make great spots to stop for a little while, have lunch, admire the views back up along the loch, and judge your progress. Just make sure, as ever, to leave no trace but your footsteps. Just beyond the southern tip of Loch Awe, you'll encounter the guardian of KIlmartin Glen, the 16th century Cairnasserie castle. You can explore this site all year round, inside and out. Carnasserie was the home of the powerful Bishop of the Isles, John Carswell, who published the first ever book composed in Scottish Gaelic. This is where things got a little bit spooky. I arrived in KIlmartin Glen after dark, but decided nonetheless to explore some of its ancient chambered cairns and kirkyards. Given that this was a ceremonial site for over 6,000 years, every shadow seemed to take on a life of its own. High on my list of things to see are the medieval grave slabs hidden in KIlmartin Kirkyard. These depict the warrior lords who ruled over the Hebrides and vast swathes of the west coast of Scotland under the title of the Lords of the Isles. For centuries, they were the custodians of the Gaelic West, warrior bards who could sing a song just as well as they could swing a sword. After a few hours in the dark, I retired to the old man's B&B just around the corner to rest up for day 2. Now, KIlmartin Glen is a place of astounding historical and archaeological richness, so to come to grips with it, you absolutely have to visit Kilmartin Museum. In addition to an extensive collection and a brilliant cafe, they've also got this interactive map of Kilmartin Glen, so if you want to find all the local castles, you can do just that. Kilmartin is also one of the best places in Europe for viewing mysterious rock art like the cup and ring marks etched into the glen over 5,000 years ago. In fact, there's so much to learn at the museum that I presented an entire episode of Dig It TV there, which you can find in the description. Just around the corner from the museum, you'll find the charming KIlmartin Castle, another former residence of the Bishop of the Isles. It's now owned by Stephen Simon, who saved it from 200 years of ruin and now run it as exclusive accommodation. There are hundreds of historic sites in and around Kilmartin Glen that you can visit and wonder at, and you could easily spend days doing just that. One of my favourites is the Templewood Stone Circle. Throughout their long lives, these stones have borne witness to feasts, burials, great assemblies, and the daily dramas of countless generations. Monuments such as these link the peoples of Kilmartin Glen, on some cultural level at least, to those on the shores of the Irish Sea, the North Sea, the Mediterranean, the Baltic, and beyond. To the south, you'll find one of the oldest continually inhabited castles in all of Scotland, Duntroon Castle. It's a great example of a popular type of castle from the 12th and 13th century known as a castle of enclosure. Vitally for any castle in Scotland's western seaboard, it has easy access to the water, with sweeping views across Loch Awe leading out to the sea. Not far from Duntroon Castle is what I consider to be one of the most special and significant historic sites in all of Scotland, DUNADD Hill Fort. 1500 years ago, this was a bustling royal centre for the first Kingdom of Scots. The nascent kingdom, which had made use of the many waterways that permeate Argyll, used DUNADD as their ceremonial and administrative centre. It may seem like an unlikely place for a capital now, but many goods from across the Mediterranean and even further afield, such as blue pigments from Afghanistan, have been recovered from archaeological digs at DUNADD. Atop the rocky promontory overlooking the glen is something truly spectacular. Upon being crowned, the new High King, or ARGYLL'S, would place their foot in the print, ceremonially linking them to and making them masters over the land. They were protected by the vastness of the Foin Mhór, a wetland ecosystem that once allowed them to pull boats right up alongside the fort. There are so many other historic wonders to see in KIlmartin Glen, like the Cup and Ring Marks at ACHNABREAC, but unfortunately it was time to press on with the journey, and I cycled along the Crinan Canal to Loch Awe. It's a beautiful route that you can walk, cycle or sail along, and makes for a perfect way to explore the area. Loch Awe has plenty of restaurants and shops, not to mention a beautiful coastline, so I stopped there for a late lunch before embarking on the final leg of my cycling journey down to Tarbert. Tarbert's about 10 miles away, and it was one of the longer uninterrupted stretches of cycling that I did throughout the 6 days in Argyll, but with views like this the entire time, the miles just seemed to speed past. Tarbert's a great little place and actually reminds me a lot of the seaside towns that I grew up around in Nova Scotia, Canada, with the exception that it's got a royal castle looming over it. But it would still be there tomorrow. For me, it was off to dinner and bed. Seeing it in the light of day, it's clear just how much Tarbert Castle dominated the surrounding area. Robert Bruce certainly recognised its strategic value and bolstered its defences in the early 14th century. There's even a story about a Viking king who was told he could claim any part of Scotland he could sail a ship round, so he came to Tarbert, a pinch point in the land, and simply dragged his ship over the land and it was his. With a mighty castle built here, that kind of thing could never happen again. This brings up an important point about Argyll and the Isles. For the vast majority of human history, waterways were not seen as barriers as they mostly are today, but as highways linking kingdoms hundreds of miles apart. In that spirit, I hopped aboard my first ferry of this journey, though my destination wasn't nearly so far away, just a 25-minute sailing over to Portavadie on Cowal. The Cowal Way is an extensive walking and cycling path that is never too crammed or busy. It also takes you past some hidden historical gems, like the ruins of Asgard Castle. Something you probably weren't expecting to find just down the road from a medieval Scottish castle are palm trees. Yet the Gulf Stream, coming all the way from the Americas, brings just enough of a temperate climate for them to grow in abundance. I stopped at the Little Kitchen, a brilliant little cafe in Kames, for a quick bite before making the climb to reach the viewpoints over the Isle of Bute. It was arduous, it was probably the toughest climb of the entire trip, but as you can see, the views made it more than worth it. This area is known as Argyll's Secret Coast, and if more people knew just how stunning it is, I don't think it would remain a secret for much longer. This to me is quintessential Argyll. Sea, stone and sky all blending together harmoniously, narrow juts of land stretching out into meandering waterways, and everything you see is historic. Each little island, for instance, home to an Iron Age crannog, medieval castle, or ancient settlement. One such place is Kilmartin Church, nestled along the River Rule. The picturesque glen it's set in is enough reason to visit on its own, but inside an enclosure in the Kirkyard you'll find another collection of West Coast grave slabs dating from the late medieval period, echoing those in Kilmartin Kirkyard. From there it's just a few miles along yet more stunning coastline to the ferry at Collintrave, which brings you onto the Isle of Bute. I must admit that for quite a while I actually avoided this area of Scotland precisely because I thought it was going to be very difficult to get around and hop from one island and one peninsula to the next. Now I'm realising it's actually incredibly easy. The sailing from Collintrave to Bute is over almost before it really begins. It takes only 5 minutes to get from one side to the other. I was thrilled to be back on Bute. It's a beautiful place, and though I'd been many times before, I find there's always more to discover on the island. Like the nearby Isle of Arran, Bute is a sort of Scotland in miniature, with a Highland fault line cleaving the island in two. Cycling south, I arrived at Rothesay, a place absolutely brimming with history. Right in the town centre, almost concealed by modern buildings that now surround it, is Rothesay Castle. This 13th century fortress is the only circular keep in Britain, and it was a flashpoint in the constant wars between the Kingdom of Scots and the Vikings who ravaged the nearby coasts. Directly across from the castle is Bute Museum, one of my favourite local museums in Scotland. There you can learn all about the island's complex and fascinating heritage. But with many miles behind me and lots of adventures still ahead, I checked into my room at the Bayview Hotel on Mount Stewart Road, where this was the view out the bedroom window. What better way than to start the day with a castle? So first thing in the morning I cycled over to Port Bannatyne, just a few miles away, and took a look at KING's Castle. It's mentioned in a charter issued by Robert Bruce, so we know it goes at least back to the early 1300s, but the tower we see now is a product of the 16th century. There are big and exciting plans ahead regarding its future use, and you can actually stay in the exclusive cottages just adjacent to the tower. It's also on sprawling grounds that include a walled garden and easy access to the coast. Next time I come back to Bute, I think I know where I'm going to try to stay. There's a definite romantic or fairy tale quality to it, and being more or less in the centre of the island of Bute, it's a great place to venture out from as well. KING's is one of at least 5 castles found on Bute, and in fact there's another tower literally around the corner from it. That makes the island a great place for budding castle hunters. Leaving KING's Castle sadly behind, I saw a set of standing stones on my OS map only about a mile or so to the west, so I popped by to check them out, and as ever with these kinds of sites, it was incredibly atmospheric. I then doubled back to Wester KING's Castle, a small but quite charming little tower within sight of KING's Castle. From there, it was just under an hour's cycle down to Mount Stewart, where I recharged in their restaurant, which works with local suppliers and grows a lot of their ingredients in their own gardens. I truly was not prepared for what came next. In all my visits to Bute, I had never taken the time to visit Mount Stewart, thinking it to be just another fancy house. I could not have been more wrong. I have no hesitation in saying that it is one of the architectural marvels of Scotland. The genius, passion and artistry that went into the construction of Mount Stewart need their own feature-length film in order to be done justice. Down to the tiniest detail, its architecture weaves together philosophy, astronomy, classical epics, biology, and myriad other fields of knowledge. It's a testament to the genius of its sponsor, the 3rd Marquess of Bute, its architect Robert Rowand Anderson, and the countless craftsmen that gave it form. Mount Stewart is not only unmissable on any trip to Bute. Having seen over 500 castles, palaces, chateaux, and eccentric structures all across Scotland, Mount Stewart easily ranks amongst the most wondrous of them all. All too soon it seemed it was time to leave Bute behind and sail for Wemyss Bay, about a 45-minute ferry journey. Anytime you're on a ferry, you've got to brave the winds and at least for a while stand out on deck to admire the views. It's hard to imagine that within an hour and a half I'll be in the city centre of Glasgow, but that's where I'm headed via Wemyss Bay railway station, which looks like something that dropped straight out of a Wes Anderson film. Just for a while, ancient standing stones and medieval castles were left behind for the buzz and bustle of Scotland's cultural capital. Departing one spectacular station, you arrive in yet another, Glasgow Central Station. It's enjoying a much-deserved spot in the limelight lately, thanks to BBC's documentary series Inside Central Station. Speaking of being inside Central Station, this is where I'm spending the night, inside the Grand Central Hotel, a place imbued with the charm of a bygone era with all the comforts of the 21st century. It also affords some very unique views over the iconic station itself and off into the distance amongst the pulsing lights of the city. What a way to bring the day to a wrap. Staying in the Grand Central also has the added advantage that the entire Scottish rail network is literally on your front doorstep, but instead of exploring further afield, today is all about Glasgow itself. Now for those who think Glasgow is just about gigs and nights out, there's enough stunning historic architecture here to give anywhere else in Scotland a run for its money. A wander through the expansive Kelvingrove Park brings you towards the University of Glasgow, Scotland's 2nd oldest university. It's a photographer's dream as well as the students, with the uni boasting sky-high student satisfaction rates. The cloisters also draw Harry Potter fans year-round for their undeniably Hogwartsian feel. The cloisters lead into the Hunterian Museum, which hosts revolving special exhibitions. When I visited, it was about the Roman frontier of the Antonine Wall, which cut through parts of what is now Glasgow. On the other side of the River Kelvin, just 5 minutes away, is the Kelvin Grove Museum and Gallery, where you can see everything from good old dinosaurs and Celtic swords to Glasgow specialties like the style of Charles Rennie Mackintosh and an original painting by Salvador Dali. Heading east of the city centre is Glasgow Cathedral, a magnificent survivor from the medieval period whose Gothic flair is easily a rival to St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. Perhaps the best views of it come with climbing the hill into the necropolis. The Victorian cemetery is multi-faith and has a dizzying array of styles and monument tombs. Glaswegians have always had a unique take on life, and the necropolis was intended not to be a sombre place, but a joyful one, celebrating the sons and daughters of the Clyde. There are tons of other historic and architectural delights scattered throughout the city, not least of which being the Glasgow City Chambers looking over George Square. But of course, Glasgow truly is so much more than its buildings. It's not just a place, but a way of life. It's a fusion of the old with a strong dose of the new and innovative. Glasgow is, above all, its people, who come together to form a proud, diverse, imaginative, and resilient city. Glasgow is the artists and dreamers who brighten its streets with stunning works, like those you can find along the renowned and ever-evolving city centre mural trail. Glasgow is the audacity of dreaming amidst adversity, of ensuring that even in a city of millions, there is always a familiar face and helping hand outstretched. Glasgow is its quirky institutions, the Barrowland Ballroom and Barras Market being home to a daily carnival of characters. Not least, of course, Glasgow is the mighty Clyde, the lifeblood of Scotland, upon whose banks the ships that sailed the world were built, and untold thousands departed to forge new lives in Canada, New Zealand, and all four corners of the world. It was time to make my own small voyage on its waters, so I got on the train at Glasgow Central, bound for the ferry port at KIRK, to once again return to Argyll. It's not nearly so far away as it seems. A quick and beautiful ferry ride brings you doon the water, as Victorian tourists used to say, to one of Scotland's not-so-hidden gems, Dunoon, on the Cowal Peninsula. Dark had settled in by the time I disembarked at Dunoon, so after a short nighttime stroll, I settled in for my final night on the road. It seemed Argyll had saved the best weather for last. I woke up at my wonderful accommodation at the Argyll Hotel, which had been welcoming visitors since the 1820s, to clear blue skies and sunshine all around. It was the perfect weather for imagining the throngs of tourists and day trippers that once crowded the docks at Dunoon looking for some R&R. Given how beautiful and exotic Dunoon feels despite being so close to home, I'm amazed they're not still crowding in. Keeping up my habit of starting each day at a castle, I began at Castle House Museum, a fantastic resource and information hub on everything from the area's prehistory right through to the two world wars. This site actually gives you two castles for the price of one. You've got the 19th century mansion which houses the museum, and the 13th century remains of the castle overlooking it all. The latter may not look like all that much nowadays, but it was once hotly contested, changing hands several times during the Wars of Independence. Nearby you'll also find a statue of Highland Mary, a local woman who became a lover to Scotland's mischievous bard Robert Burns, and whose eyes are ever set southward towards Burns's homeland of Ayrshire. The coastline was unrelentingly beautiful as I edged north from Dunoon. It struck me how close everything seemed to be. Glasgow was just up the Clyde, yet in the other direction an unmistakably Highland landscape provided a rugged backdrop to my journey. I was en route to yet another historic gem that I'd never seen before, but to which I'll definitely be returning. Historic Kilmun has been a centre of worship for over 1500 years, with St Mun being part of the same wave of wandering preachers like St Ninian who brought Christianity to Scotland. It consists of a kirkyard, church, medieval tower and mausoleum. The tower was part of the collegiate church established here in the 14th century by the Campbells, and given that the Campbells weren't the most popular of neighbours, they built this tower with every expectation that they might need it in times of trouble. Kilmun became the spiritual centre of Clan Campbell. The mausoleum contains the bodies of many prominent Campbells, including an effigy of Sir Duncan Campbell, the Black Knight of Loch Awe, and his wife Marjorie. You'll also find the resting place of the extraordinary Elizabeth Blackwell, the first woman ever recognised as a qualified doctor in Britain in 1858, who graduated above all 150 of her male classmates. Just up the road from Kilmun is Benmore Botanic Garden. Now, to be honest, when I hear Botanic Garden, I think of endless arrangements of delicate flowers and get flashbacks to some of my less exciting school field trips. Again, I was happily proved to be very wrong in this assumption. It's less of a garden in the traditional sense, and more of a masterfully curated but harmonious wilderness. Towering oaks and Douglas firs cast shadows over ornate ponds. The rugged mountainsides of the surrounding glen constantly loom in the background, and several areas such as the Bhutanese and Chilean pavilions make you feel as though you've been magically transported halfway across the world. Bursts of colour make for a photographer's dream, and there's even a castellated mansion tucked in amongst the greenery that looks every inch the fairy tale confection. One of my favourite features was the Victorian-era fernery. Ferns have always just felt primal to me. Perhaps I watched too much Jurassic Park, but the Victorians took this fascination to stunning levels, dedicating huge amounts of money and time into their ferneries, which could make them the talk of the town if done right. Benmore Botanic Garden is yet another place I can't believe I've not come to before, and thanks to this trip, Cowal has rocketed up my list of the best and most accessible places to get away from it all with ease. I got one final dose of nature at Puck's Glen, named after a troublemaking Celtic deity. There's undoubtedly a bit of magic in this place, and a network of trails takes you along sun-dappled forest paths and deep down into a dark and ominously beautiful gorge. I could not linger long in Puck's domain, however, and seemingly without running afoul of him, I returned to Dunoon to bid Argyll goodbye, at least for the time. It was only a matter of the sailing back to Gourock, a quick train to Glasgow Central, and one last ride of the rails back home to Edinburgh, which I reached just as the sun dipped behind the western hills which I had so recently wandered.